I understand it was mostly an expat thing until then. Apparently Brad's family is one of those formerly aristocratic clans that lost nearly everything in the 60s, except for their high-class contacts. We always knew that Brad's surname sounded important anyway, so it's no surprise. I suppose that is why his dad was invited. Back then it was very exclusive. This is just a small incident that occurred to me a few days ago. I'm not sure if it merits being written into the notebooks, but I figure some of you will get a kick out of it. Now, you've all been wondering what the hell I've been doing since I dropped out. The answer is not very exciting. I've just been doing odd jobs for my parents. Ever since I left university they've been on my back about making money in some way or another. Since mom has the whole catering business getting off the ground, I help her with that. But the other day dad asked me to run an errand for him. He wanted me to leave a parcel at 58th State, in District 11. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's in the far north part of town, where everything is more quiet. It's mostly just suburbia, kind of a nice and tranquil place. During winter like now it gets covered in fog, and I mean bad. You can't see 3 feet ahead of you. I got on a bus and rode it all the way to Sneed Avenue. From there it was like 30 minutes of walking to the house. The parcel that dad gave me was a small box wrapped in newspaper and tied with a string. I didn't see what it was, it didn't seem interesting at the time. It wasn't heavy and something inside it moved around when I shifted its weight. I think it might have been a toy or something. Maybe a present. The house where I had to leave this package was your typical suburban home in an affluent neighborhood, nice, clean, a bit boring. It was in front of a park, though I couldn't see much else because of the fog. I was also pretty cold and wanted to get back home as soon as possible. I rang the doorbell like 3 times before someone answered. That someone was a child. He couldn't have been older than 10. He was this skinny, blonde kid who rubbed his eyes periodically, like he hadn't slept. I didn't get a good look into the house because he only opened the door enough for his face to peer out, but I heard the TV on inside. I think he was playing some video game. It was a school day, mind you, so it was weird that he was home. I asked him if his parents were home. He vehemently shook his head. He said,
"This isn't my house, I'm just using it."
That admittedly struck me as weird. I figured maybe he was a friend of the kid who lived here. I asked him if anyone who did live here was home. He looked at me as if I had asked him something nonsensical. We stared at each other for like a minute. Then he shut the door and I heard him calling someone's name inside. I stood there like an idiot for what must have been 5 minutes. I heard dogs barking in the distance and what must have been children playing in the park, but again, it was hard to tell with the fog. Eventually the door opened again. It was another child. This one had dark hair. He looked a bit like Aaron, actually, though that's not important. He also kept rubbing his eyes like he hadn't gotten any sleep. He asked me what I was here for. I asked him if he lived here. He looked like he was considering lying to me, but finally nodded. I said that I was sent here by my dad, to deliver a package, and if his parents were in. To this he shook his head emphatically. He looked interested in what was in the box, which I was holding behind me. I was getting a little exasperated with the whole thing. I just wanted to go back home. The district, with its fog and lack of people and apparently sleepless children, was starting to annoy me a bit. So I asked him when his parents would be home, and he said he didn't know, but probably not today. I gave him a quizzical look. He just kept staring as if everything were normal. So I said, "Fine, look, I'm supposed to deliver this package here." I double-checked the address at this point to make sure I hadn't gotten the wrong house, so just take it and give it to your parents when they get home. He nodded, as if finally understanding what I was doing here, and reached out his arms. I considered withholding the parcel and coming back tomorrow, or later, but the notion didn't appeal to me much. So I reached closer to the door. The kid kept the door only half open, staying inside the house, in order to hand it over to him. At this point I got a look inside the house. I was looking into what appeared to be the living room. It was full of kids. There were about a dozen of them. They were all sitting around, watching television. But the second I stuck my head in they all turned around to look at me. It kind of felt like when you look at a pack of stray dogs as they're in the middle of eating some dead cat, and they stop to look at you, to make sure you're not going to interfere, and then as soon as you divert your eyes they get right back to business. That's what it felt like. All these kids were fixated on me, including the one who had opened the door the first time. And the TV? It wasn't playing anything. Just static. The jingles and music I had heard was coming from somewhere else in the house. I stared at the children and they stared back at me for what felt like whole minutes but was probably just a few seconds. I felt a chill run down my spine for some reason. I handed the kid the package. He shut the door. I started walking, half jogging away from the house. Inside I heard the indistinct yelling and cheering of different kids. During the bus ride back I replayed the whole incident in my head, and kind of regretted not looking to see what was inside the package, or withholding it and coming back later, when there were adults, if there are ever adults living that house. When I came home Dad asked me if everything went well and I nodded. He gave me a look, like he was expecting me to say something else, but I just went back into my room and listened to music. I couldn't get the image of the children out of my mind. It was like something out of a storybook. And well, that's all. I did ask Dad yesterday about what the package was, and about who lived there, and he said it was just a present for a friend. I didn't inquire further. You have the address of the house, so you can go there if you want, but, I don't know. I wouldn't advise it. At least not when there's all that fog. I don't have much to say about this story. However, I do know that Frank dropped out of university around 2004, as it was a matter of discussion among my brother and his friends at the time, so I think he wrote this story. District 11 is indeed known for its dense fog, which rolls in on winter mornings. Sensationalist nutjobs are nothing new in the morning news. You probably remember the cab driver who went around picking girls up and stabbing them with a screwdriver. A screwdriver. They called him the screwdriver psycho because they're not very creative around. It was in the early 90s. Toddy probably knows the exact year. Somewhere around this time, dogs in the city's District 2 started turning up dead. They had usually been strangled. Later on the dog killer took on more grisly ways like crushing their heads. Some of them were also poisoned, but cruel neighbors poison others' dogs all the time if they're being too loud or obnoxious, so it's unlikely that most of those killings can be attributed to him. The dog killer story initially perked up the media's interest when he started branching out of the neighborhood. Family pets were turning up dead via the same methods all over a certain sector of the city. All breeds and sizes, often multiple victims. The motivation behind these killings was practically non-existent. It's assumed that a lot of stray dogs turning up dead around the time were also his victims, but stray dogs turn up dead all of the time, so it's questionable. What scared people was that, A. Since the killings were seemingly random, he was probably insane, or just really hated dogs, and B. A lot of these killings involved breaking and entering at least the backyards of homes, which meant that at any point the dog killer could move on to people. The fact that he didn't bother to take advantage of the moment to steal something only made everyone more afraid of him, because it wasn't rational. I remember my parents setting up an alarm system at home for the first time back then. They also moved my brother's crib up to their room so he'd sleep with them for the time being. Back then I was still in grade school, so I'm not sure what I was supposed to do if I came face to face with a maniac, but with a baby it's different, I suppose. Not that I'm resentful. Anyway, the dog killer was at large for something like 5 months, and never far from the papers, though never quite making the headlines. He was sort of a lurking, puzzling shadow in the back of everyone's minds. A lot of people took their dogs in to sleep inside the house with them. Many more people got rid of their dogs so the killer would have no reason to enter their house. Walking down the streets meant seeing many stray dogs, some of them with collars, having been let go by their owners, wandering and scavenging for food. During his spree, many people came forward claiming that they were the dog killer. But when the killings continued it became hard to believe. There was a certain young man who appeared in many news reports and talk shows after supposedly providing proof that he was the killer, but it was then proven false. I'm not sure why so many people wanted everyone to think that they were this person, but that's fame for you. I say that Toddy probably knows the exact year when the killings took place because the whole thing started in her neighborhood. In fact, her neighbor's dog was one of the first victims, if I recall correctly. We actually didn't have a dog, so my parents were just being paranoid with the whole alarm thing, as they usually are. At this time one of the people who owned a dog that turned up headless the morning after claimed that she saw the dog killer as he ran out of her garden. She was a very old lady whose pet had been her only companion. It was a popular sob story in the media. She was also very superstitious. She claimed that the dog killer was not a man, but a devil. She said that he was a shadow with red eyes who vanished upon being seen. Most people dismissed it as the ramblings of a senile old lady, but a good part of this country is pretty superstitious as well, so others took it more seriously. Then the late night ads started. I only saw it once for myself. They aired very late at night. I had once stayed up until like 2 a.m. watching X-Men reruns, when all of a sudden the TV faded to harsh static, and then came up a grainy image. The whole thing lasted about 30 seconds. It was slow motion, low quality footage of dogs simply laying there, presumably dead. I don't know if it was footage taken from the news or filmed by the broadcaster, but the dogs were obviously victims of the killer. The ad was unnerving by itself, but even stranger was the background music. It was some kind of ritual chanting, or at least that's how I remember it. Kind of like something you would hear people singing at mass, but in a weird tone. Meanwhile you had these panning shots of dead dogs. Then, finally, at the end, superimposed in big white letters, "Please stop." Then the ad ended and faded to static, which was almost instantly replaced by usual programming. It was chilling. When the existence of these ads seeped into the cultural consciousness at large, it became clear that they were showing up in all sorts of channels, interrupting cartoons, soap operas and pornography without discrimination, usually between 2 and 5 a.m. and even more interestingly, they were not paid for by the channel companies. They were not official ads, somebody was jamming the signal of these channels late at night to broadcast the ads. Nobody ever found out who it was. The ad stopped after a few weeks. And then, so did the dog killer. At the time people had more or less gotten tired of hearing from him anyway, but eventually the killings seemed to subside. In any big city dogs turn up dead on the streets pretty much every day, but none of it seemed to bear the killer's mark or align with his modus operandi. So it was assumed that he had gone back to being a regular psycho, or returned to the depths of hell for those who believed the old lady's account. The dog killer's identity, as well as that of the mysterious broadcaster, are unknown to this day, at least as far as I know. Some of my friends probably have their pet theories, though. This guy who used to put up compilations of popular South American ads from the 80s and 90s on YouTube had one of the dog ads up, but according to Aaron it's been taken down. Just another strange tale from the city. It's clear that this was written by my brother. The baby mentioned was me. I scarcely remember the dog killer. He isn't discussed much these days. I never knew about the videos, though. I asked my parents about it and they didn't remember anything, either, so maybe it was a piece of fiction tossed in by my brother to spice things up. I looked it up on YouTube but got no results. There are many videos of people abusing dogs, sadly, but nothing like my brother described in this entry. Here's a story about how a group of people and myself ended up in a small Zionist/Illuminati skirmish at some black site zoo for research on exotic animals. Be me. Horny as fuck. Go to bar to pick up lay. Meet 7 out of 10 brunette bitch. She's super into the environment. I like hiking and the outdoors, so think this is cool. Starts talking about animal cruelty. Starts talking about animal research. Starts talking about exotic/endangered animals. The whole time I'm waiting for her to say she's a vegan or something. She orders a bacon cheeseburger from kitchen. Says fuck the system a lot. My heart is pounding at the possibility of having found a badass lady. Starts talking guns. Yeah, okay bitch. She knows more about guns than I do. Oh. She's a total power mommy and I want to love her. We drink and shoot the shit for a while, then she invites me home with her. Oh yes. MP3. She's absolutely in control. Weird as fuck. Follow her in my car. Drive for a little over 30 minutes.